science enthusiasts. My name is Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and a science communicator, but I'm also the dog dad of Bunsen and Beaker, the science dogs on social media. If you love science and you love pets, you've come to the right place. Put on your lab coat, put on your safety glasses, and hold on to your tail. This is the Science Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Science Podcast. I apologize if the first little bit of this podcast is going to sound extra echoey. I'm in my classroom over the summer. The internet went out at our house and I need that to record parts of the podcast. So I'm in an empty classroom using my backup mic. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's not fun being in my school this summer. But anyways, that's enough of that. Again, I just wanted to thank everybody who's been following us on social media. We've been really upping our science communication through threads and videos. And the core group of people that follow them, we've heard so much good feedback. A cute video of Bunsen and Beaker or a cute picture of Bunsen and Beaker always will do better than a multi-part thread. But with having such a big platform, especially on Twitter, it's really beneficial to use that to educate folks with science. And it's done, I think, in a really fun way. And I want to thank everybody for supporting us and really upping that on social media. Okay, on to the show this week. In science news, we're going to talk about a novel way to think about using stored heat to heat up cities. And I guess this is timely because if you're listening to this relatively close to when it comes out, I'm recording this the day that the records are breaking in Europe, especially London or around England, for that extreme heat that they're having. In pet science, I have this amazing study to talk about that took MRI scans of dogs and found some new, just mind-boggling conclusions about how they're different than us. And in our Ask an Expert section, I have Katie Lee, who's an engineer and an author, and we're going to talk about how she mixes science with her books. It's a really fun discussion. Hey dogs, did you know that oven mitts keep your hands cool to a certain degree? That one's so bad. The hotter my jokes get, the more fans we get. Okay, let's move on to the show, because there's no time like science time. This week in science news, so far, Western Canada is not suffering from extreme heat this summer. Like we did last summer, where temperatures in British Columbia in some places got up to like the high 40s in Celsius, which is bananas. But Europe right now is suffering with some really terrible hot weather. Records were broken in London, actually, and our guest that we were going to have in one of our live shows had to cancel because it was so hot she fell ill. So these extreme heat events are going to become more common and more frequent as climate change progresses. And that then maybe explains why I picked this science news item to chat about this week. Now, if you're in a city as opposed to a surrounding area, cities are generally going to be a lot hotter. That concrete and reflective glass just kind of creates this phenomenon called an urban heat island, especially cities without a lot of trees. That heat travels everywhere. It heats up the surface, it heats up the buildings and the people that are in the buildings, but it also travels underground. In Nature Communications, researchers looked at groundwater under cities to see the impact of heat during the summer and the urban heat island on these underground water reservoirs. Now, it's not necessarily a good thing that groundwater is being heated up by cities. Chemicals like arsenic more easily come out of rock and into groundwater the hotter that it gets. But a team of researchers took a novel approach. If groundwater is hot and that heat is trapped underground, in areas where you can't get down low enough for geothermal energy, this hot water trapped underground could be used to heat buildings in the winter. In France, for example, groundwater was heated up by 4 degrees relative to surface water by this trapped underground heat. How would you get to this heat? How would you move the heat from underground up? The same way geothermal works. You would pipe water down into the areas where it's hot. It would heat up from this excess heat, and you could move that heat up into buildings where it could dissipate and warm the buildings during the cold months. And it's not a small amount. The researchers looked at a bunch of locations, 6,000 actually, and in less than half of them, so it didn't work everywhere, but in about 43% of the locations, by doing this, it would provide a year's worth of heat for that area. So if you're wondering about sustainability, like, will you run out of heat? Like if we keep moving the heat up, let's say somebody builds this system and they're moving this hot water up and they're heating their homes, won't that heat eventually go away? And the answer is yes, it will, but there'll still be lots of heat left over for at least a quarter of the homes. Now, a sobering thought is this is based on today's heat. It's not good news for the planet. The world will continue to warm until 2050, and that's like best case scenario if the world gets its act in gear and stops CO2 production and finds a way to actually take CO2 out of the air. That's something we not really talk about, is not only do we have to stop producing CO2, we have to suck out all of the CO2 that we put into the atmosphere. This hot water underground is only going to get worse. So the researcher team made a good case that today it does well, and in the future it might do even better. And if we want to think about ways to reduce heating costs, especially if some cities are still heating their homes with natural gas, this is a way that we could harness all of that excess thermal energy that's there anyways, without the need for continuously burning natural gas or coal or whatever to heat the homes. It's a novel idea, it's interesting, and it's timely. That's science news for this week. This week in pet science, I have such a fun pet news science thingy to talk to you guys about, and it has to do with dog brains. We've always talked on the podcast about, for example, the power of the dog nose, how much more powerful the dog nose is to the human nose. Now, the really cool part of this is a team of researchers have taken MRI scans of a dog's brain and found out why. Now, the even more profound thing is that, as a lot of dog owners will attest to, and what was theorized in science, is that dogs see and smell. They see the world through smell. The evidence seems to show that. So this comes from the Journal of Neuroscience by a research team led by Pip Johnson. Shout out to Pip. And it took a look at the nose to brain connection of a bunch of dogs. So before we get into what the study found, let's just get down to business about how powerful a dog nose is to a human nose. A dog nose has between 200 million and a billion scent receptors, and that's at minimum 40 times more than we have, up to 200 times more. Not only do they have more scent receptors, the area on the brain that deals with smell, it's called an olfactory bulb, is 30 times bigger in a dog compared to a human. Olfactory bulbs are like a mass of nerves that deal with smell. And they are found on our brain, just like they're found on dog's brain, except they're way more chunky on a dog brain. So not only do dogs have all these scent receptors, so many more than we do, the data processing center is way more powerful as well. Okay, here comes the two parts of the study. They took 23 dogs, 20 mixed breed dogs and 3 beagles, I believe, and they scanned their brains in an MRI. The dogs were already identified as being pretty good sniffers, so they wanted kind of a uniform level of sniffing skill in their participants in the study. So they had MRI scans as one data point, they had MRI scans as some of the data, but they also used something else called diffusion tensor imaging. This relies on how molecules of water move throughout the body. So this imaging found that there's a superhighway from the nose to the olfactory bulb. But once the molecules of water got to the olfactory bulb, they lost the signal. So they were kind of stumped. That technique failed. But where that technique failed, here comes the MRI scans to the rescue. From the bulb, there was connections to other parts of the brain. 4 parts of the brain made sense. One was like the cortical spinal tract. So that's like for instinctual behaviors, and then some of the other tracks were very similar to our brain for memory and processing. But the one that is the most amazing is that there is a tract that went from the olfactory bulb to the part of the brain where vision is processed. 4 of these are very similar to the human brain, except the tract to the eyes. The conclusion that the team had to make is that vision and smell are intertwined in a dog brain. How and what a dog smells impacts what they see, or perhaps is perceived as vision. Now, we can't ask a dog what happens when they smell something, but we do know that it's different than how we perceive the world. This leads to a whole bunch of other questions. Is this standard in all dogs? What about a dog that isn't necessarily great at smelling? What about a super sniffer dog? Is there more neural pathways from the olfactory bulb to the eyes? And other questions the team is really excited to think about is, does this occur in other animals with an acute sense of smell like a cat? So let your dog smell the world. It's literally how they experience it. Isn't that such a cool study? That's Pet Science for this week. Hello, everybody. The Science Podcast will always be free to download and listen to. You'll never have to worry about paying for it. But we have some amazing ways that you can help us out with running the show. The first one is to think about becoming a patron on Patreon. And we call our patrons now the Paw Pack. There's a whole bunch of awesome perks and different tiers of support. We also have a very detailed and excellent merch store. And if you're listening to this in time, we have pre-orders of the Bunsen 2.0 stuffy that was just adorable. You can check it out. There's also the Beaker stuffy on our store and a whole bunch of comfy clothes. The third thing you can do is give us a good rating. Rate the podcast wherever you're listening to this. We'd love to get a great rating from you. Okay, back to the show. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Podcast, and I have engineer and author Katie Lee. How are you doing today, Katie?
I'm so great. It's great to be chatting with you.
Yeah, I'm excited for what we're going to talk about. Engineering and writing. Now, without giving away too much about where you are, people like to know where our guests are in the world. Could you tell us whereabouts you are in the world? Not your exact address, though, obviously.
Yeah, I'm in Midwestern United States, and you can definitely tell there's a lot of Midwest sensibilities that pop up in my books and my locations for sure.
Oh, it's like settings? So you use...
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Now,
so there's a fictional university in Indiana that has one setting, and then in a different series, I've created a fictional town called Riverbend, Indiana. That's a small town, and it's very cozy, and you have your coffee shop owner, and of course, also some engineers and scientists too.
If I was to write a book, I would write what I know, and it would be about like the Rocky Mountains and the foothills of Alberta, probably. So
that sounds lovely.
So let's get right into it. Can you talk to us about your background as an engineer? So just to get the brass tacks out of the way.
Sure. So I'm actually a mechanical engineer by training, but I'm someone who just loves learning naturally. So I spent most of my career in research and development. So I work in new product development, and basically by day, and then by night, whenever I can squeeze it in, I write novels with women in STEM. So they're all fiction. They're very thriller or cozy mysteries where science plays a little bit of a part in it. But most of the time during the day, I'm developing new products and planning. So I have a very diverse group of interests.
So, okay, now is any of this hush hush? Like, are the Men in Black going to come after me if I ask you about some of the products you're developing?
Oh, great question. So I don't think so, although I did email the FBI very early on. I had no idea what I was doing, and they actually have a press department.
Really? Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I sent them some questions, and they were very kind, and they didn't say any of the questions were ridiculous, which I'm sure some of them were. But, I had read a lot, but it was important to me to try to get the details right. I also have, the inside track. My dad was a cop for a long time. So I would ask him military questions or police questions because he was in the Army, and okay, how do I get this right? What's this really like? And maybe outside the shine of your typical FBI movie or something like that. So that was a piece of it because, of course, we have mysteries and thrillers and international intrigue that I wanted to make sure I incorporated, at least correctly enough that if I took a liberty, I knew it.
Figuring Out Family isn't your ordinary podcast. It's a completely new experience that helps you make your family the best it can be by giving you the deep insights to help your family thrive. You'll learn how to help your family have more productive conversations and manage life's disappointments too. You'll feel inspired by the special guests that are experts in their field of family relationships. Get valuable tips for dealing with difficult family members, repair broken relationships, improving your parenting skills, and keeping your children happy and healthy. Check it out now.
Right. Okay. But back to the products that you develop. Can you speak about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually work in the medical space. So I develop products that help people. And I've worked on a bunch of different products over my career. But that's kind of the common thread, is that they're to treat some sort of situation that someone's having. Which goes back to sort of how I got into engineering in the first place.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask is, how did you get into it? Like, what, were you a fan of science, a kid of science?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, it's a funny story. I'm the first engineer in my family, my immediate family anyway. So it was something I sort of stumbled into. I had teachers in high school that were saying, oh, you're good at solving problems in math and science. You should look into that. And so I really relied on a lot of people around me to ask questions, and then people willing to do outreach, like the podcast, that are willing to talk about it and learn from it. So it turned out to be very on brand in that I did a lot of research, and I ended up doing a space camp. Actually did twice, went to space camp. And I got done with space camp, and all of the campers were saying, I want to be an astronaut. I want to fly. It was back in the shuttle days.
Yep. Okay.
And I was like the oddball that was like, you know what? You know those people that made sure Apollo 13 got home safely? I want to be them. What do they do? And it turns out engineers. So I said, okay. So I really came into it wanting to solve big problems, but I was inspired by space. And once I got to college, then I realized what else engineers could do. I just hadn't really been exposed to it. And then the idea of doing something every day where, you know, even if you have a bad day or something's more difficult than you expect, knowing that you got to help someone by what you did sort of helps you get through that, right? Because it's not all the sort of glamorous, like prototyping is wonderful, but there's a lot of stuff that you've got to figure out because you're solving complex problems. And as long as you've got that North Star that, hey, at the end of the day, I get to help someone by getting through whatever challenge I'm facing, as done, sold. And then I never really looked back. So that said, I still love NASA, and it did show up in one of my books for sure. Because
how can you not love it? So that the whole space program is so romantic. How can you not?
Oh my gosh, the wonder of it is so amazing.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, here's all these interests that I have. I can't do them all at once, but maybe I can take a year and like really dig into this thing that I'm interested in, and then write a book about it. And so it kind of let me sneak in a couple of extra careers, if that makes sense.
No,
without having to do all the not as fun work.
So
that comes with them.
With your engineering job, is it, and this may be a somewhat ignorant question just because my background isn't in engineering. Is it helping to design the processes to get a pharmaceutical or a type of medicine?
Oh no, it's a great question.
Trial or to actually develop it from scratch?
No, so there's a couple different things. There's pharmaceuticals, and there's actual like medical devices, which are components. And so I work on the component side.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Yep. So as a mechanical, it's funny, you sort of think of race cars or rocket ships or whatever, but it turns out you actually need mechanicals to design devices as well. And
fascinating.
That's how I fell into it. Is this sort of overlapping interest of I want to help people and I have this mechanical background. And obviously we, work with people from all different backgrounds that we need to. But yeah, that's the mechanical piece of it. So it's interesting because as you design something and you're getting feedback, I actually really feel like writing books has informed that in a way, because you have to plan for revision when you write. And then conversely, I'm used to getting feedback. So editing to me is actually a really comfortable, natural thing that I think not everyone is super comfortable with, because I'm used to getting feedback, right? When you have a review and you're asking people, okay, does this work? Or you're doing a test. It's just part of the process.
Gotcha.
So there are actually a lot more overlap than you might think with creative and technical, right? So it's
I totally get it. Our Bunsen and Beaker Twitter account is just another avenue of teaching, and that's what my passion is. I'm a classroom teacher, so it's just a different way of teaching. So there is a lot of overlap when you take a deep look at what you do.
Exactly. And I am a big fan of Bunsen and Beaker.
Thank you.
They bring a lot of joy and knowledge to the internet. So
yeah, thank you. All right, so let's talk about your books. I'm excited.
Sure.
Can you give us an overview about what your books are about, and then maybe we'll get into some of the nitty gritty and teasers about them?
Sure. So I have 2 different series, but since this is the dog podcast, I'm going to focus on the dog one. So I have the Calculated series, which is a little bit more thriller, but on the cozy side. So those all feature women in STEM. They're a little bit larger in scope and maybe location. And then in my 4th book in that series, I introduced a big red Labrador named Waffle, who is quite a lot like my big red Labrador at home. And so I may have had a little inspiration there. I'm very cautious not to replicate people that I know, but the dogs 100%. I have family members that go, oh, okay, that's Daisy.
Aww.
Okay. Like, oh, that's Rowdy. I know those dogs. And so I introduced this big red lab, and that's kind of when it all sort of clicked for me that I could add dogs into the books and kind of do this really unique thing. And so I spun off that series into the Riverbend Canine series, which is a cozy mystery series. And Waffle and his handler, Alexis, have started a canine training school in a small town in Indiana. And through a series of circumstances, we have various women in STEM that come in and have issues and end up working with the FBI. And then that's how that whole series got started. So that's what I'm actively working on now.
Nice. So it's like a protagonist gets swept up into something much greater. And that's where the crises or the story arc comes from. Am I on the right track?
Exactly. You're exactly on the
I
right
love
track.
that.
So,
I love those stories that somebody's
Yes.
minding their own business, and next thing you know, they're on a wizard is like, we got to go wreck this ring. And they're like, what? I just wanted to have second breakfast.
That's exactly right. Yes, I love that. I should put that as the tagline on my book. I just wanted second breakfast. So yeah, in the first book, A Nose for Mischief, I have my protagonist is Zoe Butler, and she is just a materials engineer minding her own business in a research lab. And she sort of starts realizing things aren't adding up. Things are supposed to be performing in a certain way, but she realizes about a minute before the FBI raids the building that the people in it was the vice president of development was lying about what the devices
sketchy.
could do.
Some sketchiness.
Right. And so there were basically she quits, she's done, she's over it. Well, she finds herself, it's sort of like she's got this black mark on her resume and no one will hire her. And so she reaches out and says, I don't care, I'll work for free. Just let me get this off my resume. If they see the FBI, they'll know I was collateral damage and not a co-conspirator, right?
Yep.
And so through that, she ends up training a dog, and that gets her into all sorts of mischief, and ends up going back and sort of solving the problem. And to your point, dealing with the ring instead of getting second breakfast and having a little fun along the way. There tends to be a lot of humor in the books too, because what's a little escapism without a little bit of fun?
This is true. This story, I like the idea. I'm kind of stumbling, but I'm trying to think. There was a big American company, Thermios or something like that.
Oh yeah, Theranos. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did a podcast about it.
What was it called?
Yeah.
Thanos?
Theranos? No, Thanos is. I think that's the Avengers.
Yeah, I was like, boy, that's unfortunate if you name your company Thanos. Like, oh my god.
Yeah, retrospectively, that's an interesting connection. I've never made that.
But anyways, that's one thing I never thought of is this company had a couple bad actors up at the top that made terrible decisions, and all of the scientists and the blue collar workers that were part of it just got destroyed because of their decisions. And I never thought that there probably is some, black marks on their resume from working there. That's not something maybe you'd want to advertise that you worked at that company.
Right. So that's a really good point. That's an interesting connection. I definitely thought of it as the point of view of what would it be like. And I think, in the middle of all of the news articles that come out, I never grab something exactly, but I maybe think of how would it feel? And there's been enough companies or enough shenanigans where I think, oh my gosh, what if you're just, the employee that works there? What do you do?
Yeah.
And that sort of spark ends up turning into, a 70,000 word novel because brevity is not my gift. But I get to form it into something interesting too. So that's what I do. And actually, I was listening to a podcast. I listen to quite a lot of podcasts. And I heard something, it was years and years ago about animals in zoos and how they were treated. And that spark, I kind of have hung on to it, waiting for the right story. And that's actually going to be book 2 in this series, came from that little spark. Now, illegalities and stuff, I invent that part. But it'll be some sort of little piece of information. And my brain starts going into what if mode. And I sort of form a story around it. For the most part, sometimes I've also learned, and it's funny because my engineer brain wants to keep everything in a straight line and plan it out exactly. But if you're writing characters that really are themselves and have certain characteristics or going to respond in certain ways, sometimes I get halfway through the book and go, oh, they wouldn't do that. And I have to change plans. And so that sometimes drives the plots as well.
Right. You have to be true to your characters. They can't go.
Exactly. Right.
They can't, what do they call it when a TV show, they jump the shark, right?
You jump the shark. And actually, as a writer, I can almost see it when it happens, where you go, oh, they needed to get, they're driving a car and they need to get from point A to point B, but they forgot the person driving didn't have that map and they just get there anyway. And I think the average person watching it will go, well, that's weird. That didn't really register. And I'm like, I know what they did.
Yeah.
Here we go. So it's interesting because they say, I don't know if you've heard this, plotters and pantsers. Have you heard this term?
No, I'm sorry, I haven't.
Okay. So in the writing community, they have people who plot and people who fly by the seat of their pants. And so people in the writing community will ask what sounds like a very strange question, but makes sense to us is, are you a plotter or a pantser? And my answer is always both. I'm like, I plot, but then sometimes, you got to fly by the seat of your pants. And oddly enough, through a strange series of circumstances, and because I love comedy, I've done improv in the past. And I feel like it's a little bit like this improv game where you hit the bell every time you have to change what you just said, right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
It's called Say It Again. Yep. And so sometimes when I'm editing, I feel like I'm playing Say It Again. You're like, oh, nope, that's not right. Hit the bell. Try again. And you sort of end up in these unexpected places that end up being kind of delightful. So, yeah.
If you're a midlife woman, embracing your age and wanting to make these years your best years, tune in to the Asking for a Friend podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Folan. Join me where I get your questions answered by top experts in their fields, and I speak to women just like you in all matters of health, wellness, career, and family. Subscribe to Asking for a Friend wherever you get your podcast and refer to the show notes for where to follow us on social media.
I love that. A couple things brings to mind from our conversation. I'm a fan of there's a comedian named Eddie Izzard, and he has this great bit about somebody who's just working at the cafeteria on the Death Star. He's just
That's hilarious.
he's just telling people, get your tray, Like, get your tray. Come
Right.
on.
He's just slinging mashed potatoes.
Exactly.
Right?
And then, well, one, he gets blowed up by Luke Skywalker, and like all of the janitors and all of the people who are just schmucks on the Death Star are just destroyed. Right. So when you think of it that way, it's kind of horrifying what the rebels did. But it's a great interaction between this cafeteria worker and Darth Vader. So,
oh, that's hilarious. I've never seen that, but I love the line of thinking.
Yeah, like all of these people, there's regular people at all of these jobs, and they would have an interesting perspective on when the shenanigans went down. That's a very interesting premise for that one book of yours. Somebody gets caught up and they're like, I just wanted to help make stuff, and then all of a sudden they're involved in all of these the plot of your book. That's very cool.
Right, they've got their hands in the air and they're saying I didn't do it, and then where do you go from here?
Yeah,
and
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't want that to happen to me, but I would love to read about it. So.
And I would say that's fortunately never been a situation I've been in, and I'm quite happy about that. I've had very good experiences. I just write about people who've had bad ones. So
gotcha.
It's an interesting exercise in empathy, though, and I know that's something you guys talk about. Is I think there's something so profoundly empathetic because you can't write the same character over and over, right? And I think villains who are purely evil aren't necessarily always that interesting. I mean, certainly there's a place, but you're constantly thinking, what motivates this person? How are they rational in their own mind? And it's kind of this unintentional empathy building exercise. And the writers I know tend to be profoundly empathetic people because you're constantly putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Mm-hmm. The only side effect to that is I did have someone approach me and ask if I was okay when I was writing in public once. Because I was so in the head of the villain, I looked really angry.
Oh.
And I'm not at all an angry person, and they were concerned. Something had gone horribly wrong. And I was like, no, I'm just at the bad part.
No, that's so true. Like when I'm writing stuff for text, like not text from Bunsen, but when I'm writing stuff for our account, it makes me emotional too. Like I might actually tear up if it's like a thread of why dogs are so important. I'll get to like number 8 and it'll, it's tough. It's tough not to have emotions when you're putting words and words to page or words to text. So yeah,
absolutely. And you're absolutely right. That's just objective fact. Dogs are amazing.
They are. They're pretty good. Katie, where can people find your books? Like I'm very curious.
Yes. So you can find them basically most of your favorite booksellers have them. They're on Amazon and Nook and Kobo, Apple Books. I know Google Play. If you're a subscriber, you can do a Scribd. You can get my whole calculated series on Scribd. You can find them, all of the audio versions. I'm just starting to produce audio for the Riverbend Canine series, as well as I have one of my other books done in audio. That's a whole different skill set, and I have an amazing narrator. I really admire what she can do because I definitely could not. And so, you can find it basically all online. You can also find it at ktleeauthor.com. You can find all the links. There's a free little prequel novella that I wrote for my calculated series. You can get if you sign up for my newsletter. And then I don't spam by any means. I do just try to send out some interesting things every now and again, and certainly let people know when new releases come out. I do about a book a year, so they come out fairly regularly. The engineer side of me really likes a schedule, so I've got my schedule planned out for next year. So we should be doing about one a year for a little while.
Sweet. If you send me some of those links, we'll have them in the show notes. So there'll be links to some of those places. All right, Katie, the next question I have for you is one of our standard questions on the podcast, and it's the pet story question. We like our guests to share a pet story from their life. Do you have a pet story you could share with us?
Yeah, I had to think pretty hard about this because I had so many and I had to think of which one would be the best. So I have a small dog and a large dog, I always say, for comedy reasons. So they're every single day. They keep me laughing. But what really started my love for Labrador retrievers in particular is we got our very first puppy, maybe, a minute after I graduated college and I was an official adult. I thought, okay, now I'm getting a dog. It's time. That's about how long I waited. And we had this little yellow Labrador retriever puppy, just a ball of like love and happiness and of course chewed on everything. So we didn't have a fence yet, but we knew we were going to build one. We'd put the posts in. And so we were building this fence, but we wanted the lab outside with us. Right. And so we built this little like chicken wire enclosure. Right. I'm an engineer. I can build an enclosure.
Yeah.
And it was too tall for him. He couldn't jump over it. Right. And so we were putting the fence together and we looked in the enclosure and he's gone. And I'm like, oh my God, freak out, start calling his name. And he's right behind me. He's following me. He got out to go spend time with me. And I'm like, oh my God, that's adorable. I'm going to check the walls here. Let's check the edges, look for cracks, what happens. So we sort of, adjust the fence again and put him back. And then I start checking more frequently. 30 seconds later, the dog's gone. And sure enough, he's right behind me. He just kept escaping because he wanted to be close to us.
Aww.
And so finally we put him in just to see how he was doing it. And he figured out how to like put his little paws in the chicken wire and like roly-poly over it like a little fuzzy potato. And then immediately come find us. Yeah.
Like climb it. It's kind of like
it was like the plastic chicken wire. It wasn't like
okay.
Sorry, it's not chicken wire. It was like the plastic fencing, I should say.
Yeah, snow fencing. We called that.
Yeah, snow fencing. Yes, exactly. And so he would just sort of roly-poly over it and then come find us. And I'm like, how do you not love dogs after that? Because all he wanted was to be close. So it kind of sparked a lifelong affection for labs, and we've sort of always had a lab ever since.
They're sweetheart. Labs are such sweethearts. They're such a neat dog. It's a toss up for me when we were looking at getting a second dog between a retriever and a Labrador retriever. Like a golden and a lab, because their personalities are so similar.
They really are. And to be honest, I think our first one would have been a toss-up as well. But it was just, it's sort of, I think, what you sort of fall in love with and you go, okay, so, and now we have a smaller dog and I love him just as much. So I think it might just be dogs are amazing and we don't deserve them. That might be the answer. They're great.
They are pretty great. And that says a lot about, like there are some dogs that are more, they're more solitary, right? There's some breeds of dogs that are way more solitary.
Absolutely.
But labs are traditionally not solitary. The happiest thing they could be is just around people, like just being around people and doing stuff with people.
Well, and I find it so fun because I have so many friends and family with dogs and, I've always sort of like narrated them a little bit, like while they're talking, right? I feel like I can say that here. And I just love all their little personalities being so different, even between my two labs. They're so different. This one is like, she just wants to be close, but she wants to be close by sitting on your foot. Like, don't know why. She just likes to sit on your foot and be close. So you, okay, move your foot. And then, like she'll just sit right in front of you just to be close. And she's not going to like wag her tail. She just wants to sit right there and she's not moving. And the little one is like all over the place. He just like loves you and is like, I love you. I love you. I love you. And he's running all over the place. And you're like, okay, you're crazy, but also very lovable. And so I tend to kind of, as I'm writing all these dogs, I tend to take these little behaviors and then kind of like build on that. So each one's kind of different, just like a person, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Dogs. Yeah, all dogs have totally different personalities. You could take
so different.
7 Labrador retrievers, and they'd all be different by a long shot.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's an uplifting and adorable story. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
The other question we have on the let me start that again. The other question we have on the Science Podcast, that's a standard one, is to ask our guests for the super fact. And the super fact is something that that when you tell people, it kind of blows their mind a bit. Do you have a super fact for us?
I do. Can I cheat and give you more than one?
You can give. Yeah, I am here to listen. It is great. It is great.
Perfect. So I was debating between engineering and animals, right? As you can probably tell, there's a little bit of a balance here. So I'm going to start with engineering. So I learned in college, sound is a wave, right? And it travels slower than light. I'm like, all right, cool. But it doesn't really like register. And I think in the same way as actually seeing something where you can actually see that in person. And before they retired the space shuttles, I managed to get to Florida through like a series of circumstances where we happened to be there for the last flight of Discovery.
Oh,
and
wow.
We got to watch it. So we camped out on the shoreline, right? Like I'm surrounded by engineers, by the way. If you ever go watch a launch and you want to be surrounded by your people, like you're just hearing like space facts, like right and left. And like, oh, did you know? Like after that, and it was amazing. It was
I
just
would
amazing.
love that. That would probably be the worst for some people.
The
But
best.
I would just be like, I just let the facts wash over me like a wave in the ocean. I just be like,
they
take
did.
it.
I think this is how a lot of people feel when they like either tailgate for their favorite team or go to a rock concert. I'm like, I was among my people. It was amazing. And so we're waiting for the launch, but we get there really early. And so because there's crowds, it's crazy. And so when it finally takes off, so we got the radios and everyone like playing the countdown and you're just so excited and you could see it, but you were too far away to actually hear the sound. It's like 6 miles away. Right. But you could see it. It was so big. Because you're across this waterway, basically, and the smoke is billowing, and you can see the rockets. And then I got hit with the wave of sound. It was a delay because sound travels slower than light, right? We all know this. And it was so cool. And it was like all this theory just became real. And so the scientists in me appreciated the technology and the teamwork and, oh my gosh, the systems required to make the shuttle launch possible. But then the creative in me is like all the wonder of seeing and feeling and hearing. It was the best thing. It was so great. So that's my science fact is what it feels like to see a launch. So
I love
cool.
that. That's on the bucket list for me, for my life, is to see something go to space.
What I would say is if you get the chance, it's totally worth it. It's so cool. I've only gotten to do it once. I would love to do it again. It was awesome. And so my animal fact is sea otters have a loose bit of skin under their arms where they can store food or their favorite rock. They have pockets, and I love that. So if someone says they like that sea otter, you can go, thanks, it has pockets.
Which is handy because you know what?
I know.
I am so upset with the women's fashion industry because their clothes just don't have pockets sometimes. And it makes me angry. I'm like, how hard would it be to put pockets in those pants?
I love a pocket. And so I love that. So sea otters have pockets. So that is a thing now. I learned it from an aquarium on Twitter. I think it was a Shed Aquarium. And I've carried that fact with me ever since. Like a sea otter carries its rock in its pocket.
I love that. Man, I love sea otters. They are freaking adorable.
They are.
But you can't approach them. They're dangerous.
No, they're not.
They're
friendly, their look don't touch.
Yeah. They will attack you potentially.
Important thing about wild animals in general is they are so cute, but just like from a distance. We found that actually out about a moose once.
Moose are dangerous.
I super did not want to touch it. I didn't try, but man, it was not happy that I had like walked by it. Whew, no. But we made it.
There's a reason why mushers call them murder ponies because
do they really?
Yeah. Oh, they will. Yeah. A moose, if most of the time, a moose will just leave you alone. But like if it decides to get you, you're dead. Like you can't outrun a moose unless
they're huge.
Yeah,
you can't imagine how big they are until you actually see one. We were just hiking. We weren't trying to find a murder pony. We were just hiking, and it came out of the woods, and I was like, "Oh my! This is an herbivore? I'm sorry, what?
A dinosaur
this
cow?
Is terrifying." Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I could talk about moose for a while, but that's a good super fact about sea otters. We take pre-pandemic, I organized this marine biology trip for our high school students, and we take them to Vancouver Island on the west coast of Canada. And it's so fun. The kids have so much fun. And usually I think we go for 4 days. The third day, everybody's wiped out because it's go, 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 go. Like going out on the ocean, whale watching, gathering samples, doing science with it. It's fantastic. But by the third day, everybody's exhausted. So they usually give the kids like an hour or two of downtime. So I took a group of kids like down to the pier and we just went to sleep. I made sure they all had life jackets on. I'm like, okay, we can go on the pier, but you all got to have life jackets on. And I took a nap. And then when I woke up, there was a sea otter like about 3 meters from me that had popped out of the ocean. So it was pretty sweet.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome.
Yeah. They're bigger than you think. They're not little. They're bigger than you think. That's my sea otter story. This brings us to the last section of the podcast, the important to you section, where our guest talks about something that's important to them, a hobby or a cause. And you had a couple you wanted to talk about. One was more philosophical and one is definitely more practical. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes. So one of the first things, I was thinking about, because there's so many things to care about in the world, it can really feel too big. And so I always think of doing something, right? You don't have to do everything, but do something, make it a little bit better, pick up the piece of trash and help where you can. And maybe if we all do that, the work will feel a little bit less heavy. And then more practically, so I'm a parent and just someone who likes to cook and fill bellies. And so the idea of anyone being hungry breaks my heart. And so I've been a big fan of Feeding America, in terms of their ability to stretch $1. And then they sort of work with food banks throughout the US. So I really like what they do, to help people. So those are my two, I would say.
Like, how does that work for somebody?
Yeah,
I have no idea because I'm Canadian.
It's a big network of food banks. So that's the network that our local food bank is affiliated with. So
it's a network.
Yeah. So I went one up just to be a little bit more broad. But yeah, it's a network of food banks in America. So yeah.
When I was in university, one of the things that I wanted to get into this internship, basically, and one of the things that they suggested is you do some volunteer work. And that's great because I do volunteer work anyways, but I volunteered at a food bank for an entire year. And that was
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was such a rewarding experience. Seeing the different types of food that comes in, because a food bank is whatever they get, that's what it becomes, right? And one of my role with my science background was to calorically build baskets that would meet however many people the basket was made for, their caloric needs in a day. And then make sure it wasn't too low on vitamin C or some of the more important minerals
that's awesome.
and vitamins. Yeah. So that was a really rewarding part of it. But after Easter, it was half the box was Eastery chocolatey stuff, because that's all they had. They would get in massive shipments of Easter chocolate.
Yeah.
And it's we actually don't have, this week there's no apples, but I guess you get an Easter chocolate.
Well, actually, you're hitting on something really important, which is one thing that I got out of one of the things we did. We just volunteered. We're relabeling cans. They were dented cans.
Okay,
or they had a wrong ingredient. That's what it was a wrong ingredient. You had to relabel with the right ingredient. So we were there volunteering, just putting labels on cans, tear off the old label, put on the new label. Right. And so they got them, at a fraction of the cost. And what I learned is food drives are wonderful, but dollars are so important, because then they can backfill with whatever they need.
Yes.
Right. So, if you ever I forgot to bring a can to this food drive, that's okay.
No,
they can do
$20.
so much. Yeah. They can do so much with $20. It's amazing.
Yes.
And so I think that was one thing that I really got out of that is how much they can do. And then to your point, if all they have is chocolate, they can buy some apples or whatever that week. So it just gives them the gift of flexibility as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think ultimately that's what they did. Just because I think the team that was putting the baskets together was I think this is kind of bad for people's teeth. And then the higher ups were like, okay, yeah, we'll go get some produce with our donated funds, because they always have a little bit back the slush fund. Yeah.
And everyone likes chocolate. So, you can still get some of that out, but people probably did need a little bit of something else as well.
Yeah. It's eye opening, because those cans you're talking about, if a can is dented or if the company screws up, it's just cheaper for them to just donate it. It's just basically worthless to them. And we had what was it? Raisin Bran, 7,000 boxes of Raisin Bran.
Oh my gosh.
Because there was a typo on it. It was Raisin Bran or something like that. Right.
Okay.
It was in the Raisin Bran, the Kellogg's version. It was a knockoff version of Raisin Bran. And I think they had an extra N or something, Raisin Brawn or something. And the company's oh well. And then that's what everybody got for about a week, was a box of Raisin Bran in their hamper. So.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. Katie, this has been such a fun chat. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Science Podcast. Can people find you online? Do you have an online presence? Do you have an online presence that people could follow?
I do. And thank you for having me. This has been fantastic. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at KT Lee Writes, and then I'm at KT Lee Author on Instagram. Full disclosure, I don't post a huge amount just because it's an hours in the day thing, and I struggle to get to it. But I do occasionally post, inspirational things and cute animals and science. So I do keep it pretty upbeat. So I can definitely offer that.
Hi, this is Ross, the host of Smells Like Humans, a show about interesting and quirky human behavior. We bring humor, empathy, and warmth to topics such as relationships, dating, work, self-compassion, weddings, phobias, aging parents, travel mishaps, death, and many more. Ever wonder what happens at a cuddle party? We talk about it. Free-range kids in restaurants? We've got some thoughts. Bedtime stories for adults? We're on it. Light, fun, unscripted conversation and personal stories. Please join us by clicking the link in the show notes.
Right. And if you go to your Twitter account, your website is there, which takes you to where people can find your books and things like that.
Precisely. Yep. Right.
Thanks so much for being a guest today. This was super fun, talking engineering and authoring and otters.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. This was fantastic.
And I have opened up the mailbag. If you don't know what the mailbag is where we ask for you guys to ask questions on Twitter, and then we answer your burning questions on the podcast. But this one has a bit of a twist. No one really asked questions that pertained to all of us. All of the questions, or most of the questions submitted, were about me, apparently. Mailbag with me, Adam.
This is from Christy Seals at Do I Know You 1983. How heavy is that tuba? Was it easy to learn to do the tuba flip? Why the tuba? How heavy is the tuba? Was it easy to learn the tuba flip? And why the tuba?
Okay, so the tuba is around 25 to 30 pounds. So it's not necessarily the heaviest thing in the world, especially when it's on your shoulder. The problem is that it is really awkward. If you don't hold it a specific way, your arm loses circulation and it really starts to hurt. And if you hold it the other way, your arm starts to hurt anyway because it's awkward. It was easy to learn the tuba flip because this one guy in the Royals, Alec, taught me really well how to do the tuba flip and made it really concise and easy. And so I just practiced it for 5 minutes and then I got it. And then throughout the season, I've been doing tuba flips. So I'm a seasoned expert on the tuba flip.
Didn't Alec step in a pothole in one of the parades and almost drop his tuba when he was trying to do the tuba flip? And then you guys were not allowed to do the tuba flip anymore?
No, that was an unforeseen hazard. It wasn't his fault. Yeah, it was unforeseen. It wasn't his fault. We weren't allowed to do the tuba flip in the next parade, but it wasn't because of the pothole. It was because people were trying to imitate us and then dropping their instruments. So once that died down, we were able to do the tuba flips again. And then why the tuba? So one marching camp, I decided to switch instruments with Alec because we thought it would be funny. And then I got his tuba. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is cool. I want to play the tuba. And because I already knew how to play the tuba, I don't know. I just decided it was time to switch to the tuba. And it was really fun because we only had 2 tubas. We needed a bit of support in that section. So I gave it.
All right. Thanks, Adam. You ready for another question? We're going to do 4.
Oh, yeah.
This is from Notorious JSL. Adam, when they inevitably make a movie of the family, which actor should play you?
Okay. Now, this one isn't my own personal opinion. I will go up and say that multiple people have said that I look like this actor, and I kind of really hate it. So I won't say who the character is for the moment, but I will say that someone at my school said that I look like this character. I look like this actor, and then Annalise's sister said that I looked like that character, and Annalise unfortunately agreed. And then as we were coming home in the car today, this was Annalise's first suggestion. So apparently I look like Joe Keery, Steve Harrington from Stranger Things, as you'll most likely know him. It's terrible. I hate it. Also, one person said that I look like the Twilight dude without the red eyes. Like his eyes are like weird and red. He was in the new Batman movie. I forget his name, but like
he also was
Robert
Cedric
Pattinson
in Harry Potter.
That's also Robert Pattinson.
Robert Pattinson. All right. Well, yep. I guess those are the actors that would play me. But I don't know if we'll get turned into a movie. I don't know.
What about PETA from? It's the movie with Katniss Everdeen in it.
PETA Malark?
Yeah, maybe.
PETA is Josh Hutcherson.
Adam's pretty tall. I think Josh is a little on the shorter side.
Jason, you have no idea. You have no idea what the cinematics do to make someone look larger or smaller than they actually are. Adam, are you going to Google how tall Josh Hutcherson is?
Yep.
Pretty sure he's like
he's 5'5".
Whoops.
Okay, yeah, he's not the tallest
He's
person.
not the tallest. So cinematics did not help him.
Jennifer Lawrence towered over him in the movies, if you remember. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This is from Liz. Liz is collecting data. Take my survey. Is Adam into STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, math, like his parents, or is he leaning towards the fine arts?
So I really like STEM. I really do. My involvement in fine arts isn't much more than band and the Royals. I'm not like a person who's in drama or anything like that. So my involvement in fine arts is just band, and I do it because it's fun and because I like it. But I do also really enjoy STEM. I like putting math and science into the real world. I'm kind of split. I remember when I was little, I got a bunch of toys that were like STEM related, like build a solar powered thing or learn how to do coding. And I don't know. I'm kind of split down the middle, I guess.
You're interested in the E part, though, the engineering part of STEM.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where your sights are for post-secondary.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. And the last question is from Phil Sledge. Adam, what's it like being an international superstar?
Well, with this one, I don't know. I don't see myself as an international superstar. I mean, like, I'm not necessarily like Bunsen and Beaker are the famous ones. It's like I don't know, a way to put it is like Chris Pratt has a kid, and Chris Pratt's kid is like indirectly famous from Chris Pratt. And I guess that's kind of where I'm at. Like the dogs are famous, but I'm like indirectly famous from the dogs, I guess. But like I don't see it as like international superstar.
All right, those are the questions. We can keep a couple in the pocket for the next mailbag, Adam.
All right, excited. Well, that was the mailbag. I got to close up the mailbag here. So I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
That is the end of another Science Podcast episode. Thank you for coming back week after week to listen to our show. If you want even more science, empathy, and cuteness, think about tuning into Twitter to our live shows on Tuesday and Saturday. There'll be lots of information there. Also, think about signing up for our newsletter. You'll find information about it in the show notes. We'd also like to thank our guest this week, Katie Lee, for giving up her time to chat with us. And we'd like to give a shout out to our top tier patrons on Patreon. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Chris, take it away.
GBLB, Tracy Domague, Anne, Julie Smith, Sharon Dotson, Andrew Lynn, Elizabeth Parmentier, Peggy McKeel, Sandy Breimer, Tracy Hallberg, Jenny Jaguar, Chris Kelly, Leila Perriello, Sam, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Proven, Renee Hardy, Jody Ogren, Mary Ryder, Shelby Leggett, Mary Coos, Marianne McNally, Elizabeth Bourgeois, Karen Beth St. George, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, Ben Rathert, and Bianca Hyde.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.